Through the dust-choked Coronado heat, Lieutenant Sasha Jenkins didn't even blink as brass casings struck the concrete in a metronomic rhythm. 36 hardened operators loomed behind her, fully expecting her to fail. Instead, the most feared SEAL commander in naval special warfare stepped forward and raised a silent hand. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado is a fortress built on the mythology of invincible men. The air always smells of sea salt, aviation fuel, and CLP gun oil. It is a place where weakness is hunted, isolated, and eradicated. For Lieutenant Sasha Jenkins, it was also a place of profound, suffocating isolation. 2 years ago, Sasha had done the impossible. She hadn't just survived basic underwater demolition, SEAL Buds training, she had conquered it. She had frozen in the Pacific surf, hallucinated under the crushing weight of the Zodiac boats, and pushed her body past the physiological limits that science dictated for a human being. When they pinned the Golden Trident, the SEAL warfare device, to her chest, the brass hailed it as a historic milestone. The media called her a trailblazer. But inside the windowless locker rooms and the classified briefing bays of SEAL Team 7, a different narrative festered. To the old guard, she was a liability, a public relations stunt forced upon them by politicians in Washington. No matter how much weight she pulled, no matter how fast her swim times were, she was navigating a minefield of quiet resentment. Every success was attributed to the instructors going easy on her. Every minor mistake was amplified into a catastrophic failure of her gender. For 2 years, Sasha kept her head down, her mouth shut, and her rifle clean. She earned the respect of her immediate squad mates through blood and competence. But respect in the teams is a fragile commodity, and one bad night in the desert had shattered hers entirely. It had happened 3 weeks ago during Operation Red Crescent in Al Gaida, Yemen. The objective was a high-value hostage extraction, a CIA operative being held in a fortified compound by a heavily armed militia. Sasha's element had fast-roped onto the roof under the cover of darkness. The breach was clean, but the intelligence was flawed. They hadn't walked into a sleeping compound. They had walked into an ambush. The courtyard erupted into a meat grinder of DSK heavy machine gun fire and rocket-propelled grenades. Sasha was on point, providing suppressing fire into a darkened stairwell while her squad scrambled for cover. And then, her weapon died. It wasn't a standard jam. Her M4A1 rifle suffered a catastrophic, thermally induced double feed. 2 live rounds became fused in the searing hot chamber, locking the bolt carrier group completely solid. It was a 1 in a million mechanical failure. For 5 terrifying seconds, Sasha fought the weapon, dropping to her knee in the fatal funnel of the doorway to transition to her sidearm. She successfully drew her Glock 19, neutralized 2 combatants rushing the stairs, and held the line until her squad stabilized. But that wasn't how Senior Chief Samuel Gallagher wrote the after-action report. Gallagher was a 20-year veteran, a man who wore his combat deployments like a crown and harbored a deep, vocal disdain for women in combat roles. In his official report to the command, Gallagher stated that Lieutenant Jenkins had panicked under heavy fire. He claimed she froze in the doorway, forcing the rest of the squad to cover her incompetence, and blamed her hesitation for the shrapnel wound taken by one of their medics. Because Gallagher was a decorated legend and Sasha was the controversial newcomer, the chain of command took the senior chief's word as gospel. The fallout was swift and brutal. Sasha was quietly pulled from the active rotation. Her security clearance was put under review, and she was assigned to administrative duties, a death sentence for a Tier 1 operator. She was trapped in bureaucratic purgatory, waiting for an official inquiry board that would inevitably strip her of her trident and quietly transfer her to a desk job in Virginia. She spent her days in the equipment sheds, cataloging gear, feeling the cold stares of men who used to call her a teammate. They whispered when she walked by, "Quota, liability, I told you so." But Sasha Jenkins wasn't going to fade away in the shadows of Coronado. She knew exactly what had happened in Yemen. She knew she hadn't frozen. She knew the weapon system had failed under specific, extreme conditions, a combination of the suppressed barrel's heat, the specific batch of 5.56mm ammunition they were issued, and the fine, talcum-like sand of the Yemeni desert. She had spent the last 3 weeks poring over technical manuals, metallurgical heat thresholds, and ballistic reports. She realized that the issue wasn't isolated. It was a microscopic flaw in the bolt face of that specific lot of rifles when pushed to a thermal extreme. If she was going to be forced out of the Navy, she wasn't going to leave in disgrace. She was going to leave a trail of undeniable truth. She just had to prove it, and to prove it, she had to recreate the exact conditions of the ambush, right here in California. On a blistering Tuesday afternoon, with the Coronado sun baking the asphalt at 95 degrees, Sasha signed out her exact rifle from the armory, the very same M4A1 that had jammed in Yemen. She requisitioned 3,000 rounds of the same lot of ammunition. She wasn't going to a hearing, she was going to Range 13. Range 13 at the South Bay Tactical Facility was a desolate stretch of sun-scorched dirt, concrete barriers, and rusted steel targets. It was designed to punish. Most operators avoided it during the peak heat of the afternoon, preferring the climate-controlled indoor simulators or the shaded coastal ranges. Today, it was entirely empty. Sasha backed her tactical truck onto the dirt and began unloading her gear. Her face was a mask of cold determination, her jaw set, her eyes calculating. She wasn't just here to shoot paper, she was here to build a crucible. First, she dragged a 200-pound weighted dummy, affectionately known in the military as Rescue Randy, to the far end of the firing line. Then, she set up a grueling physical course, a 400-meter sprint track punctuated by heavy sandbags, a low-crawl wire obstacle, and a simulated casualty drag. To prove that she hadn't succumbed to the physiological stress of combat, she had to induce it. In Yemen, her heart rate had been hovering around 180 beats per minute, her core temperature spiked by adrenaline, 60 pounds of body armor, and the oppressive Middle Eastern heat. She needed her body to be in exactly that state when the rifle failed. She strapped on her full combat loadout: ceramic ballistic plates, helmet, night vision mount, medical kit, radio, and 8 loaded magazines. The gear immediately trapped her body heat. Sweat began to pool at the small of her back before she even took her first step. Unbeknownst to Sasha, Range 13 was not as isolated as she believed. Half a mile away, a convoy of 3 black armored SUVs kicked up a plume of dust as they rolled through the South Bay facility. Inside the lead vehicle sat Commander Richard Hackett. Hackett was a ghost in the conventional Navy, but a titan in special warfare. He was the commanding officer of SEAL Team 4, a man who had orchestrated some of the most classified and lethal raids in modern history. He was notoriously stoic, ruthlessly demanding, and utterly devoid of patience for military politics. Riding in the passenger seat next to Hackett was none other than Senior Chief Samuel Gallagher, who had attached himself to the commander's facility tour to kiss the ring of the visiting brass. As the SUVs drove past the berms, Gallagher glanced out the window and let out a short, mocking scoff. "Unbelievable," Gallagher muttered, shaking his head. Commander Hackett shifted his gaze from a tactical tablet. "What is it, Senior Chief?" Gallagher pointed through the tinted glass toward Range 13. "It's Jenkins, sir, the female lieutenant from the Yemen op. She's out here burning taxpayer ammo on administrative hold, probably trying to shoot away her bruised ego before the review board unpins her." Hackett narrowed his eyes. He had read the after-action report. He knew the name Jenkins. He had also read the dissenting opinions from a few younger guys in her squad who had quietly suggested the AAR didn't tell the whole story. Hackett despised armchair judgments. He tapped the driver's shoulder. "Pull over," Hackett commanded, his voice like grinding granite. "Let's see what a bruised ego looks like." The SUVs came to a halt on a slight ridge overlooking Range 13. The convoy idled, and a dozen high-ranking operators and officers stepped out into the heat. They stood in a silent line along the ridge, arms crossed, watching the lone woman down in the dirt. Sasha didn't see them. She was entirely in the zone, her world narrowed to the reticle of her optic and the beat of her heart. She tapped the timer on her wrist and exploded into motion. She sprinted the 400 meters in full kit, her boots tearing into the gravel. Dust billowed around her ankles as she hit the low crawl, dragging her body and the heavy rifle through the dirt with violent, efficient thrusts. Her lungs burned. The 95-degree air felt like breathing through a blast furnace. On the ridge, Gallagher smirked. She's gassing herself out. Typical. All show, no stamina. Watch her group sizes when she actually gets to the firing line. She'll be shaking too hard to hit a barn. Hackett said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on Sasha's biomechanics. He noted the fluidity of her low crawl, the way she protected the rifle's muzzle from the dirt, the sheer, unadulterated aggression in her movements. Sasha reached the 200-pound dummy. She grabbed the nylon drag handles on its tactical vest and hauled it backward. Every muscle in her legs screamed in protest. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. 175 beats per minute, 180. Ibabasharu. She dragged the dead weight for 50 yards, dropped it behind a concrete barrier, and immediately snatched up her M4A1. Now came the critical phase. She needed to heat the weapon's barrel to the exact thermal threshold of the Yemen firefight. She began executing rapid, controlled pairs into the dirt berm. Bang, bang. Bung, 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 bung. She ripped through the first 30-round magazine in seconds, the brass ejecting in a shimmering arc. She dropped the empty mag, slammed a fresh one home, and kept firing. Up on the ridge, the officers exchanged confused glances. "What the hell is she doing?" a lieutenant commander asked. "She's not even aiming at the steel. She's just cooking the barrel." "She's losing it," Gallagher sneered. "I told you, sir. She cracked in Yemen, and she's cracking now. This is an emotional meltdown. We should probably step in and relieve her of the weapon." "Stand fast, Senior Chief," Hackett ordered sharply, never taking his eyes off the lone figure below. The commander noticed something the others didn't. Sasha wasn't shooting wildly. Her stance was perfectly rooted. She was deliberately inducing thermal stress. Sasha loaded her fourth magazine. The handguard of her rifle was now so hot it was searing through her tactical gloves. The barrel was literally smoking, the heat mirage distorting the air above the optic. The metal was expanding, the tolerances inside the chamber tightening to a microscopic, lethal degree. She transitioned her aim to the steel targets. 50 yards, 100 yards, 300 yards. Her breathing was ragged, heavy, and audible even from the ridge. She leveled the smoking weapon at the 50-yard steel plate. She squeezed the trigger. Bang, click. The rifle died. It was a sickening, metallic crunch that echoed across the silent range. The weapon hadn't just stopped firing, it had seized completely. A catastrophic thermal double feed. The exact malfunction from Yemen. On the ridge, Gallagher let out a triumphant laugh. "There it is, malfunction. Let's see if she freezes again." Down on the concrete, Sasha's heart rate was at 190. Her muscles were screaming, sweat pouring into her eyes, blinding her. The rifle was a useless, burning block of metal in her hands. The ghosts of Yemen screamed in her ears. The overwhelming urge to panic, to drop the gun, to succumb to the exhaustion clawed at her mind. But Sasha Jenkins did not freeze. In a blur of motion so fast it made the men on the ridge blink, she diagnosed the malfunction. Her left hand ripped the magazine from the well. Her right hand locked the charging handle to the rear, but the bolt wouldn't budge. The fused rounds were wedged solid. Standard protocol dictated finding cover and using tools to clear a thermal lock. Instead, Sasha dropped to one knee, the exact same posture she had taken in the Yemeni doorway, and violently slammed the buttstock of the rifle into the concrete while simultaneously kicking the charging handle with the heel of her combat. Boat. Crack. The sheer mechanical violence of the strike shattered the fused casings. Mangled brass flew out of the ejection port. "Jesus," someone whispered on the ridge. Without missing a fraction of a second, Sasha slammed a fresh magazine into the well, hit the bolt release, and brought the weapon up. Ping! The 50-yard target rang out. Ping! The 100-yard target. She didn't stop. She immediately dropped the rifle to let it hang on its sling, seamlessly drawing her Glock 19 from her thigh holster. Pop, pop, pop. She decimated 3 close-quarter paper targets with flawless headshots, simulating the rush of the enemy combatants. Then, she holstered the pistol, brought the smoking M4A1 back up, and dropped into a prone sniper position in the dirt. Her chest heaved. The barrel was still radiating intense heat mirages, completely obscuring her red dot sight. The optic was useless. She popped up the backup iron sights. 300 yards away, a steel silhouette target the size of a dinner plate stood against the berm. The wind howled across the range, kicking up sand. Sasha closed her eyes for one brief second, controlling her breathing, forcing her 190 beat per minute heart into a steady, rhythmic pause. Exhale. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the Coronado sky. 2 seconds later, a faint, metallic ding drifted back on the wind. A perfect center mass hit at 300 yards, with iron sights, through a heat mirage after a violent malfunction clearance, with a heart rate of a marathon runner. Absolute silence fell over Range 13. The ringing of the steel slowly faded into the rush of the ocean wind. Sasha slowly lowered the rifle. She ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed the smoking weapon on the concrete. She stayed kneeling in the dirt, her head bowed, gasping for air, the weight of the last 3 weeks finally washing over her. Up on the ridge, the dozen operators stood paralyzed. The smug grin had completely vanished from Senior Chief Gallagher's face, replaced by a pale, sickening realization of what he had just witnessed. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of excuse, but the words died in his throat. Commander Richard Hackett did not look at Gallagher. He did not look at the other officers. With slow, deliberate steps, the commander of SEAL Team 4 broke from the group and began walking down the dusty incline toward the solitary woman on the firing line. The crunch of Commander Hackett's boots on the gravel was the only sound cutting through the heavy Coronado wind. He walked with the measured, predatory gait of a man who had spent 3 decades hunting high-value targets in the dark. Sasha remained kneeling by her weapon. She was drenched in sweat, her lungs still pulling greedily at the hot air, her hands stained black with carbon and gun oil. When she looked up and saw the eagle insignia on Hackett's collar, she immediately began to push herself up to the position of attention. "Stay in the dirt, Lieutenant," Hackett commanded, his voice barely above a gravelly whisper, yet it carried the absolute authority of a man who commanded Tier 1 operators. Hackett stopped 2 feet away from her. He looked at the heavy dummy behind the barricade. He looked at the fresh drag marks in the sand. He looked at the 300-yard steel target, still swaying faintly on its hinges. Finally, he looked at the smoking M4A1 resting on the concrete, the heat wave still rolling off its barrel. Without a word, Hackett knelt. He reached out with a bare, calloused hand and picked up the mangled pieces of brass Sasha had violently ejected from the chamber. Senior Chief Gallagher arrived a moment later, jogging down the hill, out of breath and desperate to control the narrative. "Sir, I apologize for this display," Gallagher panted, casting a venomous glare at Sasha. "She's clearly suffered a psychological break. I'll have base security escort her to medical and get this range cleaned up." "Quiet," Hackett snapped. He didn't raise his voice, but the word hit like a physical strike. Hackett held the twisted, shattered brass casings up to the sunlight. The 2 rounds were unmistakably fused together, the metal warped and sheared. He turned his cold, piercing gaze to Gallagher. "Do you know what this is, Senior Chief?" Hackett asked. "It's a standard double feed, sir, caused by operator panic and poor trigger discipline." "Wrong," Hackett said. "This is a thermal fusion lock. It requires the chamber temperature to exceed 800 degrees Fahrenheit. It happens when a weapon is pushed past its cyclical threshold in an extreme ambient environment, causing the brass to literally melt and fuse to the bolt face." Hackett stood up, dropping the mangled brass onto the concrete. He pulled a classified, encrypted tablet from his tactical vest. "The irony here, Gallagher, is that you thought you were burying a quota. Instead, you almost buried a massive procurement disaster." Hackett tapped the screen. "Yesterday morning, Naval Sea Systems Command issued a classified recall for lot number 884, Bravo of 5.56 millimeters ammunition, the exact lot issued to Team 7 in Yemen. Combined with a microscopic metallurgical flaw in the bolt carrier groups of this specific batch of M4S, the weapons are guaranteed to seize under heavy, suppressed fire in high heat environments." Gallagher's face lost all its color. "Sir, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Hackett interrupted, taking a step toward the senior chief. "Because instead of doing your job as a squad leader, you were too busy writing a fiction novel to ruin this woman's career." The twist of the knife was coming, and Hackett delivered it with ruthless precision. "You stated in your after-action report that Lieutenant Jenkins froze in the doorway, causing your medic, Petty Officer Bradley Reed, to take shrapnel. Is that correct?" Gallagher swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. That is my assessment." "It's a fascinating assessment," Hackett replied, "especially considering Petty Officer Reed woke up from his medically induced coma at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center 48 hours ago." Sasha's head snapped up. She hadn't heard any news about Reed since the medevac. A wave of profound relief washed over her, mixing with the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Reed gave a sworn, recorded statement to Naval Intelligence," Hackett continued, his eyes locked onto Gallagher. "Let me summarize his assessment of the ambush. Fact 1. The squad walked blindly into a DSK kill zone because the point element failed to deploy thermal drones. Fact 2. When the heavy machine gun opened fire, Lieutenant Jenkins stepped directly into the fatal funnel to provide covering fire, taking a grazing 7.62 millimeters round to her ballistic plate. Fact 3. When her weapon suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure, she did not retreat. She shielded Reed's body with her own, while transitioning to her sidearm, neutralizing 2 advancing combatants. Hackett stepped so close to Gallagher that the senior chief had to physically lean back. Reed stated that if Lieutenant Jenkins had retreated as you claimed, he would be coming home in a flag-draped transfer case, Hackett said, his voice laced with venom. You didn't just falsify a combat report, Gallagher. You coward. You tried to destroy the reputation of the only operator who held your line. The silence on Range 13 was absolute. On the ridge, the dozen high-ranking officers who had accompanied Hackett stood motionless. They had heard every word. The legend of Senior Chief Samuel Gallagher had just been dismantled, stripped bare, and left to rot in the Coronado sun. Senior Chief Gallagher, Hackett said, turning his back on the man, you are relieved of your duties at SEAL Team 7. You will surrender your security badge, your weapon, and your trident to the base commander by 1700 hours. You are dismissed. Gallagher looked as though he had been physically shot. He opened his mouth to argue, but the cold, uncompromising stares from the ridge above told him it was over. His career was dead. Without a word, he turned and began the long, humiliating walk back up the dusty hill. Hackett watched him go, then slowly turned back to Sasha. She was still kneeling, the weight of her tactical gear pressing down on her bruised shoulders. The last 3 weeks of administrative purgatory, the whispers, the isolation, the sheer terror that she was going to lose the trident she had bled, for it all threatened to crash down on her at once. Stand up, Lieutenant, Hackett said gently. Sasha pushed herself up off the concrete. Her legs trembled slightly from the physical exertion of the crucible, but she locked her knees, squaring her shoulders to the commander. Hackett looked down at the shattered brass, then at the 300-yard target, and finally into Sasha's dirt-streaked face. He saw no ego there. He saw no arrogance. He only saw the quiet, unbreakable resolve of a warrior who had refused to let a broken system break her. The teams are a brotherhood, Jenkins, Hackett said quietly. But sometimes, the brotherhood gets it wrong. Sometimes, the old guard becomes so blinded by their own prejudice that they forget what the trident actually stands for. It doesn't stand for a boys' club. It stands for the relentless, uncompromising pursuit of excellence. It stands for the person who will hold the door in the dark when everyone else runs. He pointed to the smoking rifle. You didn't just clear your name today. You diagnosed a mechanical flaw that will save the lives of hundreds of operators downrange. You built a crucible, you put yourself in the fire, and you proved the truth with pure, undeniable competence. Hackett took a step back. The wind whipped across the tactical bays, kicking up a fine mist of sand. In naval special warfare, respect is not freely given. It is extracted, ounce by ounce, through agony and sacrifice. Salutes are reserved for ceremonies and strict protocol. But as Commander Hackett looked at the exhausted, battered female lieutenant standing before him, he didn't see a quota, he didn't see a liability. He saw one of the most lethal, intelligent, and unyielding operators he had ever encountered. Slowly, deliberately, the commander of SEAL Team 4 brought his heels together. He straightened his posture, his face a mask of absolute, solemn reverence. He raised his right hand, the fingertips brushing the brim of his tactical cap. It was a silent salute. Up on the ridge, the other officers watched in stunned silence. Then, one by one, they brought their heels together. The rustle of tactical nylon echoed across the hill as 12 commanding officers snapped their hands to their brows, returning the silent honor. Sasha's breath hitched in her throat. Her eyes burned, not from the sweat or the gun oil, but from the overwhelming realization that she had finally been seen. She slowly raised her trembling hand and returned the salute. Hackett dropped his hand. A small, rare smile touched the corner of his mouth. Pack up your gear, Jenkins, Hackett said, turning to walk back toward the SUVs. Your administrative hold is officially lifted. Take the weekend to recover. He paused and looked back over his shoulder. Report to the Team 4 briefing room on Monday at 0500. My strike group is deploying to the Horn of Africa next month, and I need a new point operator who doesn't flinch when the gun stops running. As the black SUVs rolled away, leaving her alone on the sun-baked concrete, Sasha Jenkins knelt and picked up her rifle. It was heavy, scarred, and completely burned out. But as she slung it over her shoulder and looked out toward the Pacific Ocean, the weight on her chest felt completely gone. The trident pinned to her uniform caught the afternoon sun, shining brighter than it ever had before. What an incredible display of grit and resilience. Lieutenant Sasha Jenkins proved that true warriors don't break under pressure. They forge themselves in the fire and let their actions do the talking. If her unbreakable spirit and Commander Hackett's ultimate show of silent respect gave you chills, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never back down. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more epic, real-life military stories. See you next time.